We're looking at the Atlanta Braves today, kind of going back through their history. And I think one of the first interesting things that I noticed is that if you only look at the team during the period of time where I've been alive in the just about 35 years, they're really, really good. I think they've only had like 6 losing seasons out of the last 33. That's a pretty good streak of success here that not a lot of other teams can speak to.
I think it's unprecedented, and they won 14 out of 15 division championships. And this is, having a podcast where Met fans are talking about the Braves, it's probably not going to go well.
Right. I mean, I'm already not feeling well. We're afraid of COVID.
Not just because we had to do the Braves.
We're not just because we had to do the Braves. COVID's been going around here, but this certainly isn't helping.
So the Braves have lost. They've been around 148 years, and one of the first things I thought was, okay, I look at how many times have they won 100 games and how many times have they lost 100 games? Well, they lost 100 games 13 times or more.
Which is less than about 10% of the seasons they've lost 100 games. In 148 years, it's pretty good.
And they won 100 games 10 times. That's pretty close. I'm not going to make too much of a big
I think
deal
if you think
that.
about that, that means about 10% of the time they're an excellent team, or an excellently bad team, sort of going to the extreme one end or the other. And then the other 80% of the time, they're just a team.
And I think that it's been streaky for the Braves in their history, right? You talked about the most recent streak.
Right.
And before that, so from the time, before that, the 24 years before that, they had 6 winning seasons out of 24 from 1967 all the way until 1990. Now,
so they moved over to Atlanta and they stunk it up for a long time.
Well, they actually were pretty good. In the mid 60s, and they went to the division championship in 1969 where they lost to the Mets. But after that, there was a lot of hunger years for the Braves, and that's what I was fairly young at the time and all that. So that's what I remember about the Braves. I was like, well, yeah, we can always beat the Braves until we couldn't.
Whereas in my lifetime, it's been, they're the Braves. They're going to win the division. I mean, if you're evaluating a franchise based not necessarily on just World Series titles being the be-all, end-all of franchise success, you have to rate the Braves up there pretty highly just because of the sheer number of division crowns and postseason appearances they make.
Well, they've got 18 pennants, but when I look back at the pennants, a lot of that happened in funny baseball time. Mm-hmm. So they've been around 148 years.
Right.
And so we generally take modern baseball 1901 and forward, and the Braves didn't win any World Series before 1901, I should say, or 1903, the first one. So we'll talk about the 4 that they did win, and they're very exciting World Series. All 4 of them are kind of significant, and they
were pretty spread apart too, because I think the first one was 1914.
That was the Miracle Braves of 1914.
Right, and they were completely unexpected to win that title.
They went 60-16 to overtake the Giants and win the pennant.
And get into the World Series.
And they were nowhere. Right, and they won the World Series.
And then the next one was in 57?
Very good, 57. In 1957, they beat the Yankees. The Yankees obviously had won in 56 with Larson's perfect game, and in all those other years that they won in that recent before that. But in 57, Lou Burdett, who was a Yankee pitcher who they let go, won 3 games for the Braves.
Wow. So that must have been a big deal, and sort of why it took such a root there is that they came over to Atlanta in 53, and then they win the World Series just a couple years later. That's going to instantly give you a very passionate, supportive fan base because they're winners right away.
Right. So they were in Boston from 1912 until 1952. And in that period of time, they were called the Braves, and then they were sold to the National League in 1936, and there were 4 years where they were called the Bees. And they actually had bumblebees and stuff like that, even though bees is what I couldn't figure it out. But they were still called the Braves, but they were called the Bees.
Well, that's what the teams would sometimes just get called by 2 different names for some reason.
That happen
We've seen that a couple times.
With the Robins and the Dodgers.
You would also point out that that's happened in 36 when a large number of the regular players weren't playing baseball because of World War II.
No, later.
Oh, that was later.
Later. So in 36, that was a fairly
I guess it was 39 was the first year.
That was the Yankees won 36 to 39, and only because they were taken over by the league because they had ownership problems and whatnot. So, but as Boston Braves, and actually Babe Ruth finished his career as a Boston Brave, started as a Boston Red Sox.
So Boston had 2 teams for a long time.
Boston had 2 teams for a long time, and that's exactly right. And the 1914 World Series was played in Fenway Park because the Braves Park was not suited. I think for a World Series. And so as
Could you imagine if that happened today? Like Major League Baseball
play in
went
the
to
other
some
park.
team and it's like, yeah, we're not going to play the home games in your stadium. It's not good enough. I guess if the Oakland Athletics make the World Series this year by some impossible miracle, would they do that? Would they let World Series games be played at a AAA stadium in Vegas?
Well, they still are playing games in Oakland this year. They're
playing games in San Francisco.
Yeah, right, and in Vegas too.
And in Vegas, so they're playing in 3 different places.
Are they playing any games in Vegas? I don't even know.
They're playing games at the AAA stadium.
They are going to play. Okay,
I think so.
So, no, well, actually, I would say that if you really think that there's a chance, you should run down and put a bet in Vegas on the Oakland A's because you'll get great odds.
Oh, you'll get amazing odds. You put down $100 to win a lot of money.
So the Met fan looking for a silver lining, right? So the Mets have won 2 World Series in their 62-year history. The Braves have won 4 in 148. So if you add it all the way back to the end, so the Mets win World Series more often per year, every 31 years versus every 30. It's the only place where the Mets win.
Yeah.
So we have to say that because
to accumulate a faster rate of them.
For a lot of Mets fans and for you in particular, because of when you became a fan, the old saying, the Braves are kind of the Mets' daddy.
Well, yeah, because the Braves stink from 57 until the 90s. They're not very good for that long.
Well, they went back to the World Series in 58 against the Yankees again, but they lost that one. And then they went down.
And then they went down. And then they were bad until they came back. And they came back in 69.
But then they went back down again.
They went back down again until they lost the epic World Series in Game 7 against the Twins in 91.
Right.
And then
that was the resurgence of that franchise.
Right, that's where they sort of started they announced that they came back before they finally managed to get their title in 95.
Right, so they went to the World Series in 92 because they lost to the Blue Jays that time. They won again in 95 and they won that one. That was a great World Series. And
then they lost in 96 to the Yankees,
they lost
right?
in 96 to the Yankees, and then they went to 99, they lost to the Yankees. So like you said, they've been there a lot.
And then they got that 95 World Series, and then they were quiet for a long time, despite all those division titles.
Well, they won 99. They went to the series in 99.
But they were quiet. They didn't get another title till 2021.
I know. So they're really spread out. Right? You said 1914, 1957, 1995, and 2021. So there's all this space in between.
Right.
I think if you're a Brave fan, you're kind
of worried it might not be till 2070 something.
Well, I mean, I would take it right now as a Met fan because we haven't had that in a long time. And the 57 team, and you made a really good point about going to Milwaukee, right? And that was such a big deal because the Braves couldn't draw. They went to Milwaukee, embraced them so much when they went there, and the town loved them. And like you said, 4 years later, they win the World Series, and they've got a team that has Hank Aaron, Eddie Matthews, Joe Adcock, and Warren Spahn. You got 3 Hall of Famers.
And another very
really good player. So, that it was just so fun to go to the stadium. And I had the good fortune to go to County Stadium, Milwaukee, when it was the Brewers that were playing there before they tore it down.
Right, because you would have been a little too young.
I didn't you would have been a little to remember. And they were gone to Atlanta in 1966. So they did go to the World Series, the Braves, in 1948, and they lost to the Cleveland Indians, who had that's the last time the Indians or the Cleveland franchise won a World Series, and so they avenged that defeat when they beat the Tribe, obviously,
right.
So that's kind of cool, and so all those things, and they came back and won in 14, and 57 is the 3 games by Lou Burdett. They avenged the next one, and they beat the Astros in 2021, which I think it made a lot of people happy.
It made a lot of people
right, because to see the Astros go down was a big deal.
And then the Astros got theirs, legitimizing them. Like, okay, no, they really were that good of a team.
Right. But still, the Braves kind of made everybody happy. Here's something that the Braves apparently won a World Series, and they didn't even call them then in 1892.
1892.
Right. Funny baseball time, as you like to say. And here's the thing I said: they went 5-0-1 in that World Series.
But they got a tie.
I'm just reading the baseball reference thing, going, so it's so far ago you couldn't find individual game logs.
Right.
So I couldn't find the game log. Like, okay, so what happened in the tie?
It got very dark.
So, yes. And Cy Young actually was a pitcher for the opposing World Series team, the Cleveland Spiders.
In 1892?
In 1892.
Wow.
He won 36 games that season. And the Spiders, we might remember, who had then the distinction 7 years later of being the worst baseball team in the history of baseball.
remembered us
20
talking
wins
about
and
them.
134 losses. That was after they went to the World Series 7 years prior.
So with the Braves, do they have the most pennant titles of teams all time? Like, how many do they actually have?
Well, they have 18 pennants, but the problem with that is it goes into too much funny baseball time. So there's all these pennants, which means they finished first in the division. There's no World Series. There's no.
Right, they still got
anything
14 of them, like this century, though.
they had. Not know if it's even that many. They
It
had
felt
like
like
six. They had like six before 1900.
I don't know. It felt like they won a bunch in a row through the 90s and early 2000s.
Well, if you look at the World Series, we were just talking about it, and they have the 90. Let's just take it down. Here it is. So since 1900, besides 1991, they lost the World Series in 92. Okay, so that's.
Wait, are you using pennant as going to the World Series
course.
or winning the division?
No. Pennant is going to the World Series.
Oh, okay.
A pennant is a pennant, and winning a division. Now the Braves have a ton of division.
That's what I was.
So if you're talking about division titles, I can't even count them because they won 14 out of 15.
Right. That's why I was like, how do they only have 18?
Like 20 or something like that.
Right. That's what I was trying to get to the bottom of.
And I think you're right. I think the old guy in me thinks too much of pennant as winning the
nobody
flag.
Nobody calls it that. Nobody calls going to the World Series winning the pennant anymore. I don't think people use it, but I don't
know.
I think
about
but when people talk about winning the pennant, it's generally used to refer to winning your division, not winning the nowadays.
You win the flag or the title flag for your division for sure, but it's not a pennant. A pennant was always the league.
I'm pretty sure if you look at the 2016 banner for the Mets, it says the NL East Pennant Championship. They won I think the division says something about a pennant.
They were a
on
wild
there.
card team in 2016. They won the pennant in 2015 because they lost in the World Series.
Right.
So I don't know. I contend you on that. I don't think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So the Braves amazingly have a lot of great players on their team, which we'll talk
Well,
about.
I think it's interesting because I would say they have a lot of great players, but they really only have one, in my mind, truly all-time player.
Only one. I don't know if I would agree with you there. So you're going to say Hank Aaron,
Right.
obviously. And Hank Aaron, so if you go to their top 10 career categories for batters, basically it's Hank Aaron.
Right. He blows away everybody.
He's like, it's crazy. So
And I'm not saying they don't have a lot of really amazing players in the lineup, but I feel like Aaron, maybe Warren Spahn, is the only guy that kind of enters that like pantheon of baseball discussion.
There's one more.
Who?
Eddie Matthews.
Eddie Matthews.
So Eddie Matthews, third baseman, 512 career home runs, Hall of Famer, obviously. Had the distinction of being the guy on the cover of the first Sports Illustrated that ever came out, I think, in 1956.
And is he just sort of swallowed up as a casualty of the time because Brooks Robinson played around the same
that was
time
before,
this year?
way
That
before.
was before him?
Eddie Matthews was playing in the 50s.
Right.
So Brooks Robinson didn't come up until the 60s and played into the 70s.
So then why isn't Eddie Matthews talked about in that same breath?
Something you think a Brave fan now. He wasn't the defender, obviously, that Brooks Robinson was, for sure. Not that anybody was.
Well,
It's
was
really
he
not fair.
he was the hitter like a Mike Schmidt was, though?
I think so. Yeah. With that kind of power, and think of that lineup having those guys in it. So I think Eddie Matthews does get kind of passed over a little bit, but at an underrepresented position, third base.
True.
And
then you could say they do have a legacy of really outstanding third basemen between Eddie Matthews, Chipper Jones, and I hate to say what I'm about to say, but perhaps Austin Riley is going to be there.
I'm afraid you're right. And Chipper Jones is on the all-time list in a couple of places, but for things like bases on balls in his career. So I think
But any Met fan that watched baseball in the 90s can tell you how one Larry Jones terrorized the Mets for years.
he named his kid Shea.
Right, because he hit so well.
I mean,
there.
that's just taunting.
That's just. I mean, honestly,
That's
as far as
taunting.
trash talk. Just absolutely top tier banter from Chipper Jones right there.
So another thing that popped up on here, and we never talk about him, and that's because he is in the Hall of Fame. And everybody always goes, "Huh?" You've seen his name because it's a really bizarre name, Rabbit Moranville, who played shortstop, and he played for the Braves, and he is the all-time club leader in a batting category, which really amazes me because he was all glove and no hit. He had 103 triples in his career.
That's a lot of triples.
That's a lot of triples because he couldn't hit the ball over the fence, and
But he must have been fast.
Exactly, and good enough to get around. And another guy who I remember, and I looked through this list, and only shows up one time. So this guy had like a 320 career average. He played 11 years. He was in the service for 3 years in the prime
So
of
he
his
lost-
career.
he-
3 huge years. He would have had 3,000
Hits.
hits. He would have had, he hit batted like 320 for his career. He had the all-time National League hitting record for consecutive hits in a game before Pete Rose broke it.
Oh, okay.
He had 40, I think it was 44 or something like that. Tommy Holmes, who I looked at his career and said, like, wow, in a different world, this guy's a Hall of
If he
Famer.
doesn't lose those 3 prime years of his career, he might have those statistical things he needs.
Right. He was an outfielder, but a really good fielder and just a player who just never gets talked about. So Braves fans, you can thank me later for bringing up a guy who played for the Braves, for the Boston Braves, however, and that's kind of the problem.
Right.
And they also had Sliding Billy Hamilton.
No relation to Billy Hamilton of today.
No, he's and I wanted to talk about. So I want to talk about pitchers, but I can talk about stolen bases because I guess the Braves just don't have a history of guys who have stolen bases. So there's a guy all time, and so these are all funny baseball names. The top guys: Herman Long, Hugh Duffy is a Hall of Famer, but Billy Hamilton we talked about and all that stuff.
But all their leaders are guys from
Bobby Lowe, Fred Tenner. The number 6 guy all time is Hank Aaron. For stolen bases.
That's kind of surprising.
In fact, there's nobody in the top 10 other that you would know except the Rafael Furcal at number 10.
Interesting that just nobody, the Braves just aren't a team that steals particularly.
Although
Must be
he-
too hot in the summer there.
He's number 10 with 189. There's a guy right behind him at 180 who stole 70 bases this year. Right. So
He's gonna get out
obviously he's gonna take care of that. But let's take a look at the pitching because when you think of Braves pitching, and you mentioned probably the quintessential Braves pitcher of all
Warren
time,
Spahn. And then you have to think of the 3, more so the 2 main guns of the 90s teams. People would call it the big 3, but we kind of look back on it mostly as a 2.
Yeah.
Because it was Glavine, Maddox, and
Smoltz.
But Smoltz because
All 3 of them.
All 3.
They're all Hall of Famers.
Hall of Famers.
Right. So you can't. But there's another guy that we don't think about in the pantheon of all-time Braves pitchers, who is also a Hall of Famer, who has the most losses in the history of the Braves for a pitcher. He took more losses than anybody else, and he won 260 games, and he has the most strikeouts for the Braves with over 3,000 strikeouts.
That's a lot.
In Phil Niekro.
Really?
So I don't think you think about
'cause
Knuckles, as they call
we
him.
always think of knuckleballers as like, did he really deserve to be in the Hall of Fame?
So Phil Niekro had played in 740 games for the Braves. That's a lot of games for a pitcher, right?
yeah.
Right, not a relief pitcher to boot. And he, in fact, started 595 of those games. Warren Spahn started 635. So when you think about that, so those are the guys, right?
Right.
Glavine, Smoltz, Maddox. Smoltz leads in strikeouts. I was wrong. Niekro has actually fewer strikeouts with the Braves than Smoltz
Just
does.
overall, he might have more.
Right. And Tom Glavine is 3rd in games started, so they pop up here. Smoltz is really cool because he started 486 games, but he also is 2nd in saves for the team as well.
And so
that's really cool.
Not a lot of guys. That's a very short list of guys that have ever done both of those at an elite level, like Smoltz did.
So who would be the leader all time in saves for Atlanta? You know this. Think about it. Who was their closer for all the with
Was it Kimbrel? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was like,
you knew.
I'm like, it's not John Rocker.
No, John Rocker does not appear in the top 10. Smoltz is 2nd, and a guy you've never heard of named Gene Garber is 3rd.
I definitely have never heard of him.
John Rocker is number 5. You remember John Rocker?
I just named him.
That was something out there on the subway train going out during the playoff games. John Rocker back when they were playing the Mets, and so they just really don't have a lot of closers, right, in their history that saved a lot of games.
No.
And when you think about the greatest pitcher in Braves history, if you had to pick one, would you pick Spahn over Smoltz?
Question. Mm-hmm. Am I picking the career or am I picking them to win a game?
Career.
I think you probably end up at Spahn just because he's got the numbers for the career that are greater than the other 3 of them. But if I'm picking a guy to win a game, I'm probably picking Maddox.
Yeah. I think in that competitive situation, there was no better competitor, than Greg Maddux.
And Maddox, it's like I
Spahn
think
was pretty darn good, though.
Smoltz and Spahn probably had better quote unquote stuff than Maddox, but I'm not worried about Maddox ever turning in a 2-inning 7-run performance in a big game. because his location just won't let him do that.
And Spahn, you might.
Though I'm sure there will be some Brave fan in the comments that could point out some big playoff game that Maddox choked it up in.
Yeah, you
sure
find
there's
any
at least
pitcher.
one.
Like a lot of players who don't want to talk about the playoff pitching. Spahn pitched 5,000 innings for the Braves.
Right.
He also finished his career with our New York Mets.
Wasn't he a Giant at one point?
I don't think so. I think he just pitched for the Braves and the Mets.
He was.
Actually, I'm not really sure about that. I will double check it. Give me a second. Spahn pitched. He did finish his career with the San Francisco Giants in 1965. I was wrong. Very good. Yeah, he had a scintillating 4-12 season for the Mets the year before that.
I just remember him being a Giant.
Right. Well, you must have played Immaculate Grid to know that. And it was another guy on the 1948 staff, for the Braves when they went to the World Series and they lost to Cleveland. It was Spahn and Sane, Johnny Sane, and Pray for Rain.
I was going to guess Carl Hubble.
Yeah, no, that was a little before that. Carl Hubble pitched for the Giants, but a lefty,
and that's
like
a great
that.
Spahn and Rain, and
Spahn and Sane, and Pray for Rain. And that was how the Braves, because they didn't really have a lot more pitching.
But those two guys were good enough that if they got some rain, they were real tough to beat.
So. Let's talk about the retired numbers. We've had a Brave podcast here, and we've done a really sad job of not mentioning Dale Murphy one time.
He's not a Hall of Famer.
He's not a Hall of Famer. Dale Murphy won back-to-back MVPs in 1982 and 1983, and that 82 team was managed by Joe Torre. And I think he had gone to the television booth after he unsuccessfully was a manager for the Mets.
So that was his last stop before.
They won their first 13 games in 1982. They did not win the division. They didn't. It all kind of
started off well.
It started out really well. And Dale Murphy was the star. Bobby Cox's number is retired manager.
Interesting.
And what was interesting is he had 2 stints as manager with the Braves. The first one was for 4 years, like 15 years, was very forgettable. And
he would prefer we don't talk about that.
Exactly, but he became a Hall of Fame manager. Obviously, you win 14 out of 15 division championships. Chances are you're going to the Hall of Fame. Chipper.
Yep.
Okay, at number 10, Warren Spahn. Number 21, Andrew Jones.
I was going to guess Andrew Jones. Hank Aaron.
We'll just go up by number. 25. Smoltz is 29. Maddox, we talked about 31. Necro, 35. Eddie Matthews, 41. Henry Aaron, number 44. Tom Glavine, number 47. That's a great list of retired. That's an awesome list.
When Dale Murphy is the most, the least notable player among that bunch, who is a guy I believe most fans would say is a guy that probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame and is sort of unfairly not. It's a pretty good list.
So if you go to the all-time list for those guys, there's names we haven't talked about, like from funny baseball time into the early 1900s. Kid Nichols, great name, great pitcher for the Braves.
Nobody that is on planet Earth ever watched him play.
Nobody, and let's see if there's any other guys that we didn't talk about before, because I want to make sure that I give all the Braves their
due. We don't want to be accused of favoritism or leaving anybody out here.
Yeah, no, that is. I think Freddie Freeman is actually number. He's up there. He's number 12 all time in Braves WAR, which is B-WAR, which is pretty amazing considering that they've been around for as long as they have, and he didn't have as many years to accumulate it as other players can. So, we'll have another. We're going to do an episode on Hall of Fame caps and going with the cap. If Freddie Freeman goes into the Hall of Fame, he's going as a Brave.
If he wins 3 World Series with the Dodgers over the next few years.
Oh, please, just bite your tongue.
He's going to go in as a Dodger, and you know it.
And if you go to Baseball Reference and you look at the the top players for B-WAR all time, the top line of all, and most of the guys we know, except for Kid Nichols and whatnot, but you go to the bottom, it's all these guys in black and white that have mustaches and caps with no logos on them. So these are guys that, I'm a baseball fan, but, you're not going to remember these kinds of guys, today.
I feel like you're not even using the right word, remember. Remember implies you had some kind of connection to them. If you have a nameless, faceless baseball...
Well, I've heard of them is what I'm saying.
Right, heard of them, but the same way I've heard of, Constantinople when I read about it in a book.
Yeah. And why don't you read... I read about Wally Berger's career. Really good ball player.
I'm not saying they're not good baseball players. I'm not saying that their careers didn't matter. I'm just saying it is infinitely harder to have a connection to a player. Literally nobody you yourself cannot ever have watched played, or anybody else that you can talk to watched this person play.
Like right. Like you might have heard about them at best, but if they didn't make the World Series, and that's the problem with all these guys in black and white,
Right.
is they didn't win World Series, so they had none of these stunning moments.
And also, it's not like, when we go talk about a guy like Seaver, I can talk to people that watched Seaver pitched with their own eyes. If Kid Nichols pitched, I'm not even sure if he was a pitcher.
He was indeed.
Who watched Kid Nichols pitch that can tell me what it looked like?
Your great grandfather,
But maybe his father.
so all I'm saying,
That's all I'm saying.
is that you would have heard of some of these names had they played in a World Series, like Frank Home Run Baker played in the 1914 Miracle Brace. So you've heard of Home Run Baker. He didn't hit a lot of home runs, but he hit them in the World Series.
So everybody knows him.
Everybody
because
remembers
of
that for that, even though he wasn't. He was the biggest home run hitter of the time. He hit like
20.
14.
Yeah.
There was a dead ball here. And so, but at least his name, because they won the World Series. That's the point.
Right.
And they didn't win another one until 1957.
Yeah, so
I
those
think all
players
those guys in between, the Wally Burgers
lost
and stuff
to
like
time.
That, they're just lost. Even Joe Torre, is one of the top 25 WAR players for Atlanta.
Right, but
all time. And Milwaukee played for both.
25, especially when you get down towards 25, you got guys with like 20-something WAR.
His brother, Frank Torre,
Was
was supposed to be a better ball player, and then Joe came up and won the MVP and ended up being.
Who won an MVP?
Joe won an MVP in 1971 with the
Braves?
Cardinals.
With the Cardinals.
And was a good third baseman, and so he's one of those guys who got into the Hall of Fame as a manager, but probably could have been a Rule B candidate as well, had that been the case.
His managerial candidacy was just strong enough on its own.
So yeah, we talked about the only manager of
Note.
of note, unless you think Brian Snitker is somebody
too early to
that we
say.
should talk about, and then he inherited a good team. They had some guys that you've never heard of that I've heard of Billy Southworth. He's a man again in the time when they weren't winning anything. So the Braves will continue to torture us.
Oh, yeah.
I think this year is going to be no different.
No. They're going to be good.
They're going to be good, and the Mets won't be as good.
Probably will finish in third.
Probably you're an optimist.
I am. Eternally.
But we're jealous, Braves, because you've been so good for so long. And how about letting somebody else win?
26-30.
I was very relaxed in that podcast. I was really trying hard to not be manic. What's that?
Here's just a little bit.
I was fading towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do it different. I didn't go through like the top players in every position of the Braves because I had so much information already.
You had other stuff. And, Mom, he did say how many pennants they won.
Yeah, 18. I had said that in the very beginning.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you.
That's fine. Watch yourself. Don't want to impale you again.
Yeah.
Los Bravos. Yeah, I think we covered the Braves deeply there.
Yes. Brought up guys that don't ever get brought up.
And we brought up Rafael Furcal.
What do you
Going in.